Love Island isn't really a dating show. It's a televised study of desirability, social status, rejection, and human behavior. And we, the audience, are sitting comfortably on our couches watching the excitement unfold. Imagine this. A woman gets publicly rejected, a man betrays someone he claimed to care about, someone cries alone after being replaced by a newer, more attractive option. There's no phones, no clocks, they're isolated with strangers in a room filled of lust being tortured with experiments. And millions of people rush online to discuss it like it's the highlight of our evening. Now imagine all of that happened at your workplace or among your friends. You would probably call it toxic, maybe even cruel. Put on a tropical island though, some slow motion camera shots, dramatic music, and public votes, and suddenly it's entertainment.
Islanders, tonight we're handing over the power to America.
Love Island is one of the most successful reality shows in the world. It's also one of the most strangest social experiment ever created. The show claims to be about finding love. What it's actually revealing is something much deeper. Our obsession with status, our fascination with rejection, and our tendencies to rank people according to their desirability, and the uncomfortable reality that watching other people's emotional chaos can be incredibly entertaining. I don't think Love Island viewers are psychopaths, but I do think the show does reward some really odd behaviors, and the scary part is most of us, myself included, enjoy watching them, and that's exactly why I wanted to talk about this. When the new season of Love Island started, I seriously considered making a video on it. Not because I had some profound analysis or I was particularly invested in any of the couples on the show, but because everybody was watching it. Everyone was talking about it. And if we're being completely honest, for a small creator like myself trying to grow my channel, covering the biggest show on the internet is usually a smart move. But somewhere around episode 3 or 4, I noticed something that completely changed the direction of this video. I opened TikTok and found thousands of people analyzing Melanie. Every facial expression was being analyzed, every reaction, every insecurity, every mistake. People were like literally diagnosing her, mocking her, calling her manipulative, calling her desperate, toxic, the new Huda. That's a whole nother topic for another day. And while some of the criticism was fair, what really struck me wasn't Melanie's behavior. It was actually ours. Because if we're being brutally honest, most women have displayed at least one of the behaviors people were dragging her for. Can we be for real for 1 second, please? Maybe not on national television, maybe not in a villa, but in moments when we felt insecure, unchosen, jealous, rejected, or simply not healed yet. The internet wasn't reacting as though they were watching a human being struggle with every human emotion. They were reacting as though they found a new villain. And that made me realize something. Love Island isn't just an experiment for the couples, it's literally an experiment for the audience too. Because every season, the Islanders review who they are, but the viewers, we review who we are. And sometimes what we review isn't particularly flattering. I'm Sunshine. Welcome to the channel. I'm basically a professional yapper, and if you somehow found your way onto this corner of the internet, there's a good chance you are too. Let's talk about Love Island and why it might be one of the most revealing shows ever created. The first thing Love Island does, something most of us barely notice anymore, it turns people into products. Now, to be fair, the Islanders did sign up for this. Nobody accidentally ends up on Love Island. Most of them know exactly what comes with it, the followers, the sponsorship, the brand deals, you name it, podcasts, the influencing career waiting on the other side. A lot of people sign up for it. So this isn't a conversation about innocent people being exploited against their will. It's something much stranger than that. Because once someone enters the villa, they stop being viewed primarily as a person and they become a character, a brand, a storyline, but most importantly, a product competing for public attention. And what's fascinating is how quickly the audience adapts to that reality. Listen to the way people talk about the Islanders.
She's carrying the season. He's losing viewers. They're a strong couple. She's winning. He's falling off.
The language sounds less like romance and more like the stock market, honestly. People aren't simply dating, they're literally accumulating social capital. They're building public favors, they're managing their images, and they're competing for relevance. And perhaps the most revealing thing about Love Island is that this isn't actually unique to the show. The villa is just an overdone version of the world outside of it. Modern life asks asks all of us to become brands, if we're being honest. Social media encourages us to cultivate ourselves. For example, LinkedIn encourages us to market ourselves. Dating apps encourage us to package ourselves into 6 photos and a witty little bio. We're all learning how to present ourselves as products one way or another. Love Island simply takes that process and puts it under a microscope. What happens when your romantic values is determined by votes, likes, and audience approval? The answer is that love starts to look less like a relationship and more like a performance. And the audience becomes part of the performance too. Because we're not just watching connections form, we're literally evaluating them, we're ranking them, we're scoring them, predicting which ones will survive, and deciding who's worthy of staying and who's worthy of leaving the villa. In other words, we're participating in the marketplace. Modern dating is increasingly becoming a market. Not because people are shallow, I don't subscribe to that notion, and it's not because romance is dead, but because technology has transformed humans' beings into profiles. Love Island didn't invent that reality, it simply found a way to televise it. Every season people say the same thing: I just want genuine connection, I want people who are there for the right reasons, I want real love. And yet, if we're being honest, the islanders who dominate our conversations are rarely the healthiest people in the villa. They're usually the most chaotic, the best strategists, and the biggest risk takers. The people who create the conflict and the people who understand consciously or unconsciously that attention is the most valuable currency in the villa. The couple who communicated well, established boundaries, and spent weeks treating each other with respect rarely become cultural talking points. Betrayal can dominate social media for days. One explosive argument can generate millions of views. Humans are naturally drawn to social conflicts. Long before reality and television existed, people gathered around stories involved with betrayal, deception, rivalry, and scandals. Love Island didn't create that instinct, it literally just found a way to monetize it. The show understands something fundamental about human psychology. Negative emotions are often more attention-grabbing than positive ones. A healthy relationship is reassuring, yes, but a train wreck, that's fascinating. And that creates a strange incentive structure inside the villa. Islanders quickly learn that being liked is valuable, but being talked about can be even more valuable. Because in the attention economic, visibility often matters more than approval. In some way, Love Island mirrors social media itself. Online, the most reasonable voices rarely receive the most engagement. The most nuanced opinions rarely go viral. The most emotional, provocative content typically wins. Outrage literally spreads faster than agreement, and conflict spreads faster than peace. The truth is, reality television operates on the exact same principle. What makes this particularly interesting is that audience often condemn manipulation while literally rewarding it at the same time. We criticize islanders for playing games, then we spend an entire week discussing them. We complain about toxic behaviors, then make those moments trends. We say we want genuine people, yet the people who catch our attentions are often the ones creating the most emotional chaos. The uncomfortable truth is that attention itself can be rewarded, and Love Island has built an entire entertainment empire around that fact alone. So when manipulation keeps appearing season after season, maybe the question isn't why do islanders keep doing it? Maybe the better question is, what behaviors are we rewarding when we keep watching it? Now let's be honest for a second. A lot of what happens on Love Island would be genuinely devastating in real life. Imagine being rejected by someone you like. Now imagine that rejection happening in front of millions of people. Imagine developing feelings for somebody, then watching them flirt with somebody else. For most of us, those experiences would be deeply painful, potentially embarrassing. But on Love Island, it's called a Thursday night episode. What's changed in the social media era is that the embarrassment doesn't stop when the episode ends. Years ago, an embarrassing television moment would air once and then disappear and people would eventually forget about it. But today, it gets clipped, shared, meme, reposted, and then analyzed by strangers, turned into reaction videos, and turned into think pieces. Let's be so clear, I'm not standing outside this phenomenon. I'm participating in it too. You're literally watching a video where I'm discussing people from a reality TV show. A single bad woman can follow someone long after they've left the villa. Every week, social media collectively chooses a main character. Someone to celebrate, someone to criticize. If Love Island is a social experiment, then it might be one of the most clearest demonstration of attractive privilege ever put on television. Because before personalities emerge, before emotional connections form, before anyone knows who's kind, who's funny, who's intelligent, loyal, people are making decisions within seconds. Who gets approached, who gets picked, who gets pursued, who gets ignored, who's considered desirable, who has to work significantly harder for the same attention. attention. The entire format revolves around appearances. Love Island doesn't pretend otherwise, and I appreciate them for that. The first impressions are visual, the initial attraction is visual, and the rankings are visual. The competition itself is visual. People are treated differently based on how attractive they're perceived to be. I did a whole video on desirability and attraction. I'm gonna put a link here so you can go watch it, but I do talk about the difference. And what's fascinating is that Love Island doesn't create beauty standards, it simply reflects them in real time. And then of course, there is the conversation that always seems to hover around Love Island without ever fully disappearing, which is race, colorism, and the treatment of dark-skinned women. I personally would prefer dark-skinned women stop going on reality TV shows, particularly when it pertains to love. But I do think it's worth acknowledging because every season after season, many viewers notice a very similar pattern. Who gets desired first, who gets desired consistently, and who gets labeled attractive in theory but overlooked in practice. And the thing is, the black people in these shows are beautiful. Perhaps what's most telling on Love Island is how audience reacts when darker skinned women express the same emotions, the same insecurities or frustration as everybody else. What fascinates me isn't simply what happens in the villa, it's what the reaction reveals outside of it. Because every season, people insist that attraction is purely personal preference. And of course, individual preferences are real, don't get me wrong, but when millions of people repeatedly notice the same pattern, it raises bigger questions about culture, representation, and desirability. Questions that extend far beyond a reality television show. And that's ultimately why Love Island is so compelling. It turns invincible social hierarchies into visible ones. It takes assumptions we normally keep hidden and puts them on display. One of the strangest things about Love Island isn't what happens inside the villa, it's what happens outside of it. Because the moment an episode ends, millions of viewers begin conducting investigation. Suddenly, everyone becomes a relationship expert, a body language specialist, a therapist. People start literally examining every interaction as though they're reviewing evidence in a criminal trial. Complete psychology profiles are being constructed from a heavily edited television footage. To be clear, sometimes people do display really unhealthy behaviors on Love Island, and sometimes the criticism is justified. Sometimes viewers notice things that are genuinely concerning, but what fascinates me is how quickly certainty emerges. People who have never met these islanders become literally convinced they understand their entire character. Not from years of interaction at all, and not even from like real life relationships, but from edited scenes designed primarily to entertain us. And I think part of the reason this happens is we're really just watching the islanders, we're watching ourselves, or to be more precise, we're watching people who remind us people we've known. The guy who ghosted us, the girl who broke our heart, the controlling ex, or the emotionally unavailable situationship. So when viewers react to islanders, they're often reacting to something much older, typically a memory, an insecurity, or some unresolved experience. The islanders become screens onto which we project our own stories. The internet loves certainty, it loves categories, and it loves simple explanation. But real people are rarely simple. They're quite contradictive, messy, emotional, confusing, which is why I sometimes wonder whether Love Island is exposing the islanders at all, or whether it's actually just exposing our discomfort with things that are complicated. Because the moment someone does something we don't like, our instincts is often not to understand them, it's to diagnose them, to label them, to place them into a category that makes it easier to explain. And maybe that's the real reason reality television sparks such intense debates. Not because we're learning about the islanders, but because we're revealing the assumptions we already carry about relationships, gender, attraction, and human behavior. The villa gives us people to analyze, the audience supplies the story. If there's one thing Love Island proves every single year, is that viewers don't just watch contestants, they form relationships with them. It is literally scary. Not real relationships, of course, but parasocial ones. One-sided emotional connections with people they would never actually meet. And what fascinates me is how quickly those relationships form. Sometimes before the first episode has even aired. For example, this season, before many contestants even had a proper introduction, people were already digging through old social media posts, analyzing their following list, investigating their dating history, and building an entire narrative about who they were as people. It's almost as if modern audience no longer watch reality television, we audit it. In fact, some viewers approach new islanders the same way a company approaches a potential employee. We run background checks, we review their online history, we examine who they associate themselves with, and we look for like problematic statements, digging through years of digital footprint. And the only difference for these islanders is that that it's not a job interview, it's a dating show. And yet somehow islanders are often subject to a level of scrutiny that many politicians, executives, and public figures literally never experience. Now, before anyone misunderstands me, I'm not saying accountability is a bad thing. There are absolutely situations where public scrutiny is justified. If someone has a history of racism, discrimination, or genuinely harmful behavior, I completely understand why viewers would want to know that before supporting them. Frankly, there are certain behaviors that should disqualify someone from being rewarded with a national platform. But somewhere along the way, we've expanded the investigation far beyond harmful conduct. Now, it often feels as though contestants are expected to pass an ideology background check before they're even allowed to be perceived as human. And that's where things start becoming uncomfortable for me, because what we're often judging isn't behavior, it's identity, and we're doing it based on fragments, tiny pieces of information that may or may not accurately represent a person's belief, growth, or character. What's interesting is that this level of scrutiny rarely happens with people we know in real life. Most of us extend grace to our friends, our families, our colleagues, the people we interact with every day. We understand that human beings are complicated, that people change, the context does matter, that individuals are often bigger than their worst opinions or worst moment. But reality television participants don't always receive that same grace, because parasocial relationships create a strange illusion. We start feeling as though we may know people we've never met, and once we feel we know them, we start feeling entitled to judge them, defend them, protect them, attack them, cancel them, you name it, or we feel personally betrayed by them. That's why viewers become devastated when islanders behave completely differently outside the villa. The person they formed an attachment to wasn't necessarily the real individual, it was a version, a heavily edited character created through hundreds of hours of footage. And to be fair, that's not entirely the audience's fault. Reality television is designed to create emotional investment. The entire format depends on us picking favorites, choosing sides, and celebrating some people while we criticize others. But sometimes I think we forget something important. Those contestants are not fictional characters. They're real people who have been turned into storylines. And while storylines are easy to love or hate, real people are usually far more complicated than the roles they've been assigned. The expectation seems to be that islanders must arrive on screen as perfectly cultivated human beings, free from contradictions, mistake, or unpopular beliefs, which is a really fascinating standard considering most of us would struggle to pass that same level of inspections ourselves. Because if strangers spent a week scrolling through our old posts, our old relationships, our old opinions, and our worst moments, I suspect many of us will look a lot less reasonable than we imagine. Which brings me right back to the central question of this video. Is Love Island really exposing the contestants, or exposing our tendencies to confuse access with intimacy? Because seeing someone every night on your screen can create a feeling that you know them, but feeling like you know someone and actually knowing them are two very different things. And this brings me to what I think is the most interesting thing about Love Island. The show presents itself as a dating program, a search for romance, a journey towards finding love. But if you've watched enough seasons, you eventually realize that love isn't actually the primary thing driving the villa. Social hierarchy is. Underneath the flirting, the recoupling, and the dramatic declarations of affection, there's another game being played, the competition for status. When you strip Love Island down to its essentials, the islanders aren't just trying to find romantic partners, they're trying to figure out where they stand. In many ways, the villa functions less like a dating environment and more like a social ecosystem. Or to put it less academically, it's basically high school with better lighting. Think about how much of the show tension comes from social positioning rather than romance itself. I don't think Love Island viewers are psychopaths. I think we're human, curious enough to watch, empathetic enough to care, but judgmental enough to pick sides. And we can be self-aware enough to occasionally recognize ourselves in the people we're criticizing. Maybe that's the real reason Love Island works. We think we're observing the experiment, but every season the experiment is quietly observing us too. It's like a Hunger Game. The Hunger Game. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I generally love to know what you think. Is Love Island actually a dating show, or is it a social experiment disguised as one? Let me know in the comments below. I skipped so many things because I'm kind of tired of talking now, but if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you like, subscribe, and stick around. I'm Sunshine, your professional yapper. I'll see you in my next video. Bye!